Well, and it's fine. It's like people
I'm gonna take
visit.
all of your projects. have the idea. So I'm going to talk for probably like 20-30 minutes about who I am and why I got really deep into this rabbit hole of the idea of portraiture, which I've been obsessing over for the last year. We're going to talk about what the method of portraiture actually is, what it looks like, and what is it trying to solve for. I have two examples of portraiture that are currently or have been used in schools to help measure impact in a creative way. And I'll talk a little bit about them and then just have them to hand you to read at home. And then for the latter half, I really want to have a conversation about the applicability, because portraiture is a really amazing thing, but it takes a lot of capacity. And for schools that don't have capacity or resources, I do think there's a lot of ways to integrate these ideas into all sorts of schools, but that's what I'm curious to have a brain trust of you all to talk through and brainstorm for each other, how can these ideas actually work with the schools and education settings that we are in. So let's do some intros. I have a prompt for us. Because portraiture is all about storytelling, I was hoping we could go around and introduce ourselves, our names, anything you want want to share about your background, why you're here. And then describe a specific moment or memory when you saw something really good that was happening in a school that A, you found hard to communicate to others, or B, that you didn't think would be legible or translatable through traditional evaluations. So portraiture is all about like making things come alive for other people. So I'll give us like 5 minutes to think through and maybe jot down some notes of a moment or memory that comes to mind. And feel free to paint the portrait in you know, a storytelling way if you care to. Okay, that sound good? Anyone have questions about that? Cool. Let's take like a couple minutes just to think through an example and then we can share. Also, do any of you all want to participate at all, or just watching? Because you're more than welcome to jump in at any time.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you have the backup, so you can.
Okay, yeah, pull up chairs though if you guys
Yeah.
want to join the conversation.
Okay, cool. Who wants to start?
I'm willing to start. I'm Justine. I am an instructional coach and reading specialist in Rochester Public Schools in Minnesota, not New York. And I work my work is at an alternative learning center for high school, which is not like a charter school. It is a alternative setting for students where the mainstream high schools have failed educationally. So we often talk about them coming to us as being educationally damaged, like essentially, you know, they've been failed one way or another. And so one of the things that we've done that came out of what happened during COVID is that, and we just knew that we had to reimagine our school coming back, we started having what we call student-centered learning Wednesdays, and we are offering, since we're such a small school, we don't have extracurriculars, we don't have a lot of the opportunities that mainstream schools have, but Wednesdays we've decided are days for students to have those experiences. So we get to teach outside of our licensure areas and just do experiences for students that might be academic or might not. So everything from like equine therapy to rock climbing to boxing to cross stitch to like there's just all these different experiences. And so I was partnered with a community partner this quarter who is teaching how to braid knotless braiding for natural hair. And I had a group of about 10 girls that were in this group with me. And one of the things, like we've had a hard time explaining to not only like the district why we need these Wednesdays, because they're like, this is non-academic time and what's the value of this time. And then like also to the community who also sees us as like the school for the kids that are naughty, right? Like this, we got this like image. So there's a couple different ways. This is why this session was important to me, like how do we describe who we really are? But one of the things that happened in my session on this knotless braiding was, there was a couple students in there, that, just listening to the quotes from them, like, and I wrote down some of the things that they said, like, this is really hard, but we can figure it out. And one of them was like, I'm done, I can't do it, I don't know how. And they're like, no, you're not gonna give up, like, you're gonna keep trying, we have 7 weeks to figure this out, like, and just those things, that like, not giving up and that reiteration and the sticking with it, and that you can't measure, right? But that there's so much value in that. So that was portrait of a specific one.
Did you say your name one more time?
Justine.
Justine.
I'm Katrina, and I'm kind of a hybrid position, so I teach 3rd grade part-time, and then I also am the associate academic dean for our online school, so totally different things.
Yeah.
And then I lead our English language arts community from K through 5, and then I create our PD for reading instruction for our elementary. So lots of different things, but it's all interesting. But one of the things that I would say would be hard to really communicate to others exactly is one of the things that I do in my classroom is I have a 3rd grade classroom, and so our school is K3 through 12th grade, and so we partner with a 3-year-old class, and we go read to them for half an hour every week. And so in the beginning, these 3rd graders who are so used to people pouring into them because they're cute and they're little, had to completely set themselves apart and pour into these 3-year-olds. And it was about making the 3-year-olds have a good time, not about them being cared for. And so it's just been fun to, in the beginning they were like, I can't get them to read with me, I'm so distracted. And I'm like, well, have you tried this and try this? And you could see someone going, wait a minute, she does that with us. But the others were like, I'm gonna try that. And so just this last week I was watching them and they were all just so engaged, and the kids were with them and they're so happy to see each other, and I was like, they're totally pouring into these kids and they're finding success because they're trying different strategies, and it's just been fun to see that in place.
Pass, right? My brain was a little bit on that.
What's your name?
Oh, Tori.
Hi folks, I'm Frank. I am a doctoral student at UPenn. I study the history of higher education in the US. But I'm connected to Grace because we worked together to start a school in Alaska, which Grace, I'm sure we'll talk about. So I actually haven't taught students, but have been very much involved in building school communities. But the example I thought of was the best education class I took in college. I was going to school in Connecticut. We had this really zany professor named Professor Lemons. He had like bright yellow glasses, so like really leaned into the lemons thing. And he was like a lifelong education consultant and educator, and just really talented and dynamic. And he designed the best final project I've ever had for a class, in which we were in like different groups, and each of us had to come up with some sort of like K-12 school reform that we wanted to research and articulate the value of. And he, because he's such a well-connected education consultant, he basically invested all of his social capital to invite all of these like famous superstar superintendents and like state-level administrators and folks, and like invite them to a like conference that we were going to host as the students, and like pitch our ideas to them.
Wow.
And it was just like something about like the fact that we had to host it as the students, and the fact that like he had clearly put himself on the line to some extent for our like harebrained, not that great ideas, and that like everybody was taking that space so seriously, even though we knew that we didn't have a lot of expertise as the people in the room. was really transformative, even if I'm sure the ideas were like not actually that helpful to them in the end. So, yeah.
There's something about yellow. It's really
Leading into that, it's really.
Yeah.
I am Grace. I'll go over a little bit about who I am later, but right now I work at a place called Workshop U, which is a new kind of college experiment running out of the Community College of Philadelphia. And the example I chose was from the school that we worked at in Alaska, which was also an alternative college, and a main kind of tenet of that school, part of the model was communal living. And so it was a very small school. We had 15 to 20 students who were all living residentially, doing their own cooking, cleaning, self-organizing. They kind of ran a little democratic body amongst them to live communally together. With the idea being that we learned so much through having to live intimately with other people and make decisions and form relationships and care for those relationships. And so one moment that I thought was really amazing to the idea that communal living can be a powerful education was when I went one night into the student kitchen, and it was just a total tornado, goldfish thrown everywhere, trash overflowing, none of the dishes were done. It was just a terrible, terrible mess. And there was this one student named Eli who was head in hands sitting there, just overwhelmed and overcome, being no one's doing their chores, we can't, respect the space, how is this working, we're failing. And we just went on in this really gross kitchen to have an amazing conversation about this idea of accountability and how you can hold people accountable and take things seriously while also these are your friends and your peers, and you're the point of communal living is not to get it extremely right, it's just to live well together. And so we started brainstorming all these ideas about what were kind of playful or light ways to keep structure but still have a fun time and a good relationship with the group, and talked about the ethics of public shaming and what does it mean for people to have a fair contribution, and just kind of this funny thing about this really dirty kitchen kind of opened up a lot of reflection about how people live together in him.
I'm Hadley, and I used to teach middle school history at an independent girls' school in Philadelphia, and I now do educational consulting. I was also one of the founders of, if you've ever heard of it, the EdCamp movement, Teachers Teaching Teachers. So I founded that with 8 other people here in Philadelphia. Some of us met at EduCon in 2008 kind of thing. So the thing that came to my mind when I was teaching, we've shifted from 40-minute classes to 90-minute classes without much PD. And so I decided that 90 minutes with 8th graders doing US history was a very long time, even if you're doing projects, even if you're shifting and all that sort of stuff. So I came up with an idea that the kids initially thought was really crazy, which was my classroom was down, you had to cross a bridge to get over to the gym. And so we would do walk and talks, and I'd pose a question to them, put them in pairs, and then they would walk to the gym. If there wasn't a class in the gym, they walked around the gym, or they just went up and down the stairs twice and then walked back to my classroom and reported out. And the first time I did it, they thought I was totally nuts. It was free time, we get to but the more that we did it, the more they realized that it gave them a break, it gave them the physical movement, it gave them a purpose. So they had to come back having solved whatever the problem was, or come up with whatever the questions were that I wanted them to come up with. And they had a good time. And so it relieved that in this small space for 90 minutes at a shot. So it just, but presenting that to teachers, I was teaching with a lot of teachers who were not very interested in moving beyond, they sit in their desks for 90 minutes. And so luckily my class was the end of the hall before you went to the gym, but I still had teachers sort of what are you doing? And, and even when I could explain it to them, they were still the loss of control
Yeah.
that they felt was happening while the kids were walking.
Fantastic.
Was-
Awesome. Do you have any moment that comes to mind, or no pressure?
All right, Torian, the site coordinator for the CT program here at South Academy, Center City. I also teach drama, and so that's where this story comes out of. In my drama class, there's a lot of movement, or I want the kids to move, and so there's a lot of energy as freshmen. And so I asked, I think this is the first time this has happened, but I asked them, I was like, okay, y'all seem like you're off the walls. Like, what do y'all want to do? Like, we want to do something. We're ready to move. We're ready to play a game or something. And so I was like, my intention for the class is to have you all like be a stream, be together. So I took them out of the hallway and we just like did a lap, but not just like run from the school. We started and we marched. And then we picked up and said, okay, what does a casual walk look like together? What does it look like when we're running together? What does it look like when we're like skipping together? And so that's not the moment, but that's what was happening. And so we're going through the common spaces, and as you know, we share kind of like 2 schools. And the kids watching were like just so enamored, so like, a big group of like 30 freshmen, you know, like skipping and going through the hallways, and it really was this moment of like, is this school? But I'm enjoying this. Like, this is a place where anything can happen, and people are with it. And so that's my moment.
Awesome. Smells so good about anything. Cool. Thanks, y'all. Yeah, I feel like what strikes me about all these moments is like something was working in each of these scenarios, and there's so much good stuff that is really working in schools. But often it's hard to communicate to people. Storytelling does a really powerful job of like dropping people into the moment to say like, here's why this is working. I can only really tell you if I'm able to bring the whole scene alive. But that often people, districts, funders want more than just stories, and they want data or evidence, and they want more to say, how do you know this is working, or why is it working, or how is it working? And so that's kind of what portraiture seeks to speak to, is how we can both use storytelling as a really powerful mechanism to communicate all the good stuff that's happening in schools, especially the stuff that may not look like school, but also kind of satisfy the constraints of working in schools in the real world. Okay, so I'm just gonna not do that every time. Cool, I'm gonna talk a little bit about me and about portraiture, and then we'll share some examples and do some discussion. So a little bit of my story is that the work I do is mostly helping build new schools with alternative pedagogies, especially in the higher ed space, although I'm fascinated by high schools and love high schools, so maybe high schools soon. There are 2 schools that I've worked at in the past couple of years. The first is called Outer Coast. It's a small kind of liberal arts college that both Frank and I worked to help build in a small town called Sitka, Alaska, which is like a 9,000 person island in Southeast Alaska. We have a very small cohort. That was one of our first graduating year-long classes. This is a picture of me fishing because harvesting and gathering traditional and local foods was a big part of the school. That was campus. That's what Sitka looks like. So yeah, we work together. The school has many amazing kind of components of it, but it's safe to say that it did not usually look like what school is supposed to look like, and I work on grant writing at the school especially, and trying to figure out how to tell the story of the school in a way that would both like capture it authentically, but also make sense to some random foundation on the other side of the country was definitely a struggle, and led to my interest in this work a little bit. And then just this fall, I moved to Philadelphia to start working at Workshop U. I don't know if some of you who are from Philly are familiar with the Workshop High School. Yeah, which is a really amazing, innovative high school in West Philadelphia. And the two founders of this high school just this year decided to launch kind of a college-type version of the school based in project-based learning and design thinking that helps kind of older young adults in their mid-20s figure out how to shape their life and make design choices about where they're going next. So these are kind of the two contexts that I'll be sharing examples from about how portraiture works in each of these very different schools. Okay, so what led me to portraiture? The mechanisms of Outer Coast were really unique. Communal living, like I was talking about, students self-governed. There was a lot of storytelling work and kind of story craft work going on, and students participated in language revitalization of the indigenous language, and a lot of kind of traditional and cultural activities that were such a formative part of the education. And you know, Frank and I both, felt very moved by what was going on at the school through these kind of different pedagogies. But what wasn't working is kind of how we were communicating that work to the world. The first situation where we had trouble was accreditation. We were trying to get accredited as a 2-year degree granting college. And accreditors ask for all sorts of different evaluation and measurements to, you know, which is good. They want to say, are you a real college? Are you moving the needle forward for students in the ways that you want? But you know, there were very certain boxes that you had to fill, and it felt so hard to take this really expansive, amazing magic work and try to stuff it into a version that they would understand that would get us access to the thing we needed, which was to be able to grant students degrees. So there's all sorts of versions of that on the high school level too, where just to survive, you have to satisfy certain requirements to show people that things are working. But even, you know, that was like, we're satisfying these other people over here. But for our internal team, we also wanted to know, like, is what we're doing working? And I know how. And, you know, we started, the school started like 8 years ago, and every single year, any of you have been part of a new program, a new school, you're constantly redesigning everything. There's so much iteration that happens. And we wanted to know, like, you know, just within our team, what are the internal mechanisms that we will employ to measure things and see if we're doing good in the ways that we want.
It would seem to me that figuring out what's it actually mean to be working
Yeah.
is one of the, I mean.
Yeah.
Totally. Right. What change do you want to see?
Yeah.
What do we value? What do we?
Totally. And then third was just this idea of how do you let other people into the work? How do you get, you know, let's say even this local Sitka community. It's a very small town. Everyone knows that this place, Outer Coast, exists, but it's kind of a mystery, like what goes on in there? Who are these people? What does this education look like? When we were describing kind of the really moving moments of the school, I always had this feeling of like, oh, you just kind of had to be there and watch it and be in that environment. It felt hard to even bring a small tech community kind of into the work. So I started to think, right, that new methods of education are not being measured in ways that can capture the richness. And also, this is a really big problem for those innovative things to be sustainable and for them to improve on their quality. Also, an example from the Philly landscape, Simon, who's someone I work with at the workshop school, I was asking him, like, how does all this stuff, you know, sit for you at the high school level? He created this really innovative high school and has fought for a long time for it to be recognized, like, what does this look like for you? And he gave me this little dialogue where he said, this is a conversation I've had many, many times. He says, you know, the school system is broken and we need to do something different. And everyone else is like, oh my God, we totally agree, you're right. He says, great, here's a project-based model that's really transformational and we see it a lot. And then everyone says, oh, but by the way, we also want to see your test scores and we're going to value you just the same as everything else. And there's this like roadblock of tension where like people agree with him, but then there's no action being taken on the back end to support new innovation. So yeah, if testing and other kind of quantitative and even qualitative metrics of determining what's working in schools isn't working, then we need new forms of evaluation. here is a meme that I put together that I just find really funny. A little child tracing a cat. And the thing that ends up is just like, oh, it can be so disheartening when you see the stuff going on in a classroom or in school, and then you see the output of like a survey response that you give to your students, or the test scores, or any sort of metric that you're going to be presenting to someone else about what has happened there. It can just feel so flat and disappointing. Okay, so this got me really interested in portraiture, and I'm going to describe a little bit about what that means. So portraiture, and if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about anything, that's totally cool. So portraiture is a method of qualitative research. It's a narrative form of storytelling that makes the subject, whatever you're trying to portraitize, come alive in ways that traditional metrics can't. Portraiture is it's a method, but what does that mean? It's a really specific method of interviewing, observing, and then synthesizing and analyzing that qualitative data that has a lot of kind of rules and specifications for how you work with that qualitative data. It shares a lot of qualities with how people do ethnographies and write ethnographies. And storytelling is kind of at the center of all the rules and regulations for how you interview, observe, and analyze your data. So portraiture seeks to combine systematic, empirical description, those are a lot of big words, with aesthetic expression, blending art and science, humanistic sensibilities, and scientific rigor. So this is the formal definition of portraiture, a lot of words. But basically, I think the blending of art and science is what makes sense to me. It wants the rigorous discipline of really good research, but it also knows that human beings understand and glean insights from stories, narratives, and things that feel human to them. So it says, can we hold both of those, art and science, in our hands and come up with something that meets them both? So the goal of portraiture is basically to not leave anything on the table and not kind of squish real human experiences into stuff that can fit in surveys. The goal is to capture complexity, dynamics of schools, of school cultures, of people, and all of the subtlety of human experience that goes into organizational life. I can also share this with you all later, the slides. So portraiture can do two different things at the same time. First, it can be descriptive. So it basically communicates the kind of what is happening, so people really understand it, instead of just seeing a header of oh, we ran this workshop where students learned knotless braids. It really makes people understand what does that mean and what does it feel like. So it describes it. And then it can also be evaluatory. That's, I think, the really exciting part about it. It can communicate what exactly is the impact and effect of something, how is it working, how well, and how do we know. So the person who created portraiture about 20 or so years ago, 20, 30 years ago, is Dr. Sarah Lynn Playfoot. I'm a total fangirl of Dr. Sarah Lynn Playfoot. Frank knows this, I talk about her all the time. I actually met her once and she signed my book. But she's amazing. She is a researcher. She did a lot of her research and teaching work at Harvard. And she basically was working to try to improve schools and felt like none of the tools available to her did what she was seeing justice. And so she was like, well, okay, I'm going to create my own. So she created this whole research method and has been working across her lifetime to help people kind of see and give, and basically have people see it as a credible research method. And she created it specifically for the education world. She was a teacher, an education researcher, and she was working with high schools in the Boston area. And so I do think portraiture has a lot of good potential in most fields, but portraiture was created for schools, and I think there's a reason why. So she actually wrote a book. She wrote many portraits to try to figure out how do you do this method well. And then she actually wrote a book along with Jessica Huffman Davis called The Art and Science of Portraiture that basically describes like exactly how to do this method well. Because it's not so simple as like, here's the formulas and here's what good survey design looks like. You know, she really wrote the tome of what it means to do this method. I highly recommend you read the book, but just to give you like a taste of what it means to do portraiture work, here's a couple highlights of what the method is like. Okay. So first, it's a method that's designed for accessibility. She calls it the People's Scholarship. So she says that it's basically the convergence of narrative and analysis, and its goal is to be able to be read by people beyond just academics. So, so much education research, you do it, and then it goes into the journal, and no one can read it, or you write a dissertation, and no one reads it. And she wanted, you know, part of that is because there's, you know, gatekeeping to that work, but part of it is because when people, I don't know, every time I read a research study on education, like I just get really bored. And it's like hard to understand, and it's not engaging, and like I love education. And so if I'm having trouble like gripping into someone's research study, like there's no way that your everyday teacher or anyone who can use that practitioner is really going to take the time and dig into that stuff. Second, portraiture values the standard of authenticity over the standard for traditional validity. So this work cares more about like what is true and what is right versus what can you prove is valid based on a certain set of scientific standards. And that's really important. Portraiture just seeks to like make available what is really happening. It cares a lot about authenticity. Third, and this is really unique to portraiture over, let's say, something like ethnography, where when you write an ethnography, you go into a community or a school, and you are supposed to distance yourself from the work as much as possible. You're supposed to say, okay, I need to be unbiased, unattached. I'm purely like on the fly on the wall observer, and I'm gonna, you know, take notes and do all this stuff, but like I need to separate myself and my background and my identity as much as possible from the work I'm doing. And portraiture kind of calls that bluff and is like, well, that's great if it worked, but there's no way that people can do human-centered research without actually being incredibly intimately involved and affected and implicated in the stuff that they're writing and producing. And so it's not to say that wouldn't be great, but portraiture said, okay, if we know that, you know, our human biases are inextractable from the work we do in research, then we should just name it and kind of work with that. So portraiture uses the self as a primary research instrument for documenting human experiences. So when someone writes a work of portraiture, they're going to be reporting on what they see and what they've heard from interviews, but they're also going to be reflecting on how they felt about it and what it was like to be there, and kind of all of their, the ways that their background and the way that they see the world affects the way that they are translating what they're seeing. And I think that's just more of an honest way to go about research, and something really revolutionary that I don't think other methods do before Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot created this. And then in the book, the main kind of tenets of portraiture that Dr. Lightfoot goes over are creating context, using voice, thinking about relationship, drawing emerging themes, and then creating something called an aesthetic whole. So the goal of portraiture is to create this aesthetic whole, and you do it through making sure that you're thinking about these other four things. So she does such a great job of explaining all this in the book, but for the sake of time, I won't go too much into it. It's a great book. So one example of how Dr. Lawrence Lightfoot used portraiture, one of her first works that is amazing, was called The Good High School. She was working in Boston, and she had this question of what makes a high school good. And there were all sorts of people who were studying and producing, you know, research reports on this very question, but she didn't really find them satisfying. So she went to, I think, 5 different schools and spent months at each school interviewing and observing and immersing herself in those spaces. And she wrote basically a novel-length portrait of these good high schools, and you know, why were they working, what did it look like, how could we communicate that to the world. And this, you know, was published by a popular press to this notion of accessibility. This is not locked away anywhere. People, like, I read this just for fun because I was like, this is such an interesting story, but it's also research.
I also just want to note, I hadn't noticed before that it won the AERA's Research Award, which is like also a very traditional
Yes, very.
educational association. So for it to be both a popular trade press and to be respected by ERA is pretty impressive.
Big deal.
Totally. Yeah, something Frank's told me from his time in the PhD is that if you publish popularly, there's a sort of disrespect that comes with that amongst the academic community, like, oh, you're speaking to the everyday average person. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
That's basically it, yeah.
Yeah.
We'd rather you have it buried away. So.
Yeah.
Keep all the secrets.
Just so wild. So the Good High School, I think, is a really good example of the two different ways that portraits can be used. The first is kind of internally as a mirror. So even, let's say, she goes to this Boston public high school. Everyone, all the teachers are there all the time. They kind of understand what's happening. But sometimes, as a whole, for how the high school is working at large, you don't even know that, even if you're in it. And so what she did is she wrote The Good High School, and she took that chapter about whatever school it was, and she handed it to every teacher and every principal in the school and said, I came in and I tried to paint the portrait of what you're doing here. Like, here's a document to react to. And the teachers and the principals, read that as a book club and then used it as a formative document to discuss their work at the school. And a lot of stuff they would read and be like, oh yeah, she totally got it right. Like, that's amazing. This is exactly what it's like. Like, that really captured it. And then she writes that a lot of times they really bristled with a lot of the interpretations and things that she observes. They'd read something and be like, oh my God, no, that's not what it is. Like, and they really bristled with all of the stuff that she was, putting out there. And that's just as important. Portraits aren't meant to say this is the absolute truth. It's just meant to be a mirror to what's happening, that your reactions, both positive and frustrated, can be really helpful for a school to work together to kind of level set about what's going on and what's the difference between how we see ourselves and how this outside person saw us. And that can be really powerful information. So it's used internally, and it's also used externally. I'm sure a lot of you educators have often been like, okay, here's this thing that we're really struggling with, but I'm sure someone out there has done it really well. Like, let me go look for examples of great schools and how can we learn lessons from them. But oftentimes, like, there's not just a blueprint or a how-to guide for the stuff that people do really well. You have to understand it, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of engaging with educators to figure out how did you make it work. So when she published this, a lot of other high schools in the area read it and felt like they were able to say, oh, these are what the best practices are. And I finally understand them and maybe understand better how to bring it to my own school because it was such a narrative accessible document. So yeah, two different ways to use portraiture. Internally, it's meant to improve the quality of the program, and externally, it's meant to help others understand innovative work, and hopefully down the line, like, support innovative work, fund innovative work, etc. Yeah, I think I'll skip over this. The headline here being, like, portraiture becomes an organizational text. And also the way that you use symbols and imagery, it can help people understand what's happening in a really new way when they have kind of stories to align with. And then externally, stories capture attention. They make people want to know about what you do. And yeah, that's it. Okay. So maybe I'll take a pause here before we get into quick examples, and I'm really excited to talk and have a discussion for most of the rest of this time. But before I do, I wanted to see if anyone has any questions or anything you want to talk about before we look at some examples.
I'm curious if you're implementing any of this in your doctoral program, and if it comes up in your doctoral program, like, this kind of qualitative research.
Yeah, I would say that education research as an industry is, like, definitely trending more towards qualitative research. Like, in my pro seminar of 20 like first year doctoral students last semester, I would say that all but one of them said that they were using qualitative methods somewhere in their research practice. But the word portraiture definitely wasn't getting thrown around. I think the closest we would get to is ethnography and ethnographic methods. So yeah, it is still somewhat niche, but definitely in the conversation.
Yeah, when Sarah Lawrence said, when I went to one of her talks, she said that she had to fight to use portraiture for her dissertation, and everyone said, "Don't do it. Like, you're totally gonna blow your career. No one's gonna, no one's gonna respect that. Like, you have to choose a rigorous method." And she was able to fight to do it, and now, so many years later, people still have to fight somewhat for their advisors to approve this as a real method of qualitative research. But it's gotten a lot easier, and she had tons of examples of students of hers who use that as their dissertation method, which is promising, but I think there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, could you maybe say a bit about like what about the methodology itself and what creates what makes it rigorous in terms of like how you would go about actually conducting a portrait?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot. She did a lot of thought work on how to ask the right questions and how to really build deep relationships with subjects that I think, even though it feels very rigorous to me, the way she goes about thinking about the interviews. But mostly I think it comes from the synthesis, to say, once you have I think doing interviews and collecting field notes might resemble how that's done in most methods. But it's really in the synthesis where the collection of themes, the crafting of a story, the understanding of character, and kind of the literary writing of all of those things in a way that both brings it to life without losing the kind of factual, like without drawing too much from the truth of your data, is like the really tricky thing. And I think, I can't quite describe. It takes a while to get through her theories on how you should do that, but I think that's where the rigor is. It's in really deep, intensive, long, thoughtful work in the synthesis of all that data and in the writing, and being able to constantly go from the thing you're writing to the notes that you wrote and make sure that those things have integrity to them. So when I've written portraits, it takes a really, really long time to make that match in a way that you feel good about.
This is kind of a two-part thing. One, I appreciate your presentation. I thought portraiture was from I'm a filmmaker, so I thought it was about taking pictures. And what I found, or what I have learned today, has been so much more than, and I feel like is in line with the work that I want to do. The thing that comes to me is kind of like the biased researcher, I guess, and how this portraiture is really about forming relationships. And with that, there's so many different relationships that you have with people. Like, as a male teacher, I'm going to have a different relationship to my female students than my male students, or my black students than my other race students, because of my historical background or ethnical background. And so I think something that's been getting to me is then how do you, is there an asterisk that says, this is from the perspective of a black male teacher, or from how does that come into play when you're distributing your data?
Totally, that's a great question. And when I read Sarah Lawrence Lightwood's books, so a lot of the book is actually storytelling about herself, and kind of weaving that into the narrative of the stories that she's telling about other schools. So she'll basically describe, here's something I'm seeing in the classroom, and then she'll say, wow, I reacted in this way, and this is what it made me feel, and this is how I'm analyzing why that's working. And then she takes a step back and says, I wonder why I feel that way. Maybe it has something to do with this experience I had in school growing up, and this part of my identity that may be interacting, or I had a really strong reaction to this, and I analyzed it in this way, maybe because of this aspect or this experience. And so a lot of the actual research is putting that personal kind of storytelling and identity side by side for people to see. so that anyone reading it, it's like almost like you don't even need the asterisk in the beginning because the asterisk is like all the way through.
So to do this work, you almost have to have a very strong sense of your own identity, so that
Yeah,
you
sort
can
of
keep it
self-portrait.
Yeah.
separate from the work.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really reflective practice. And yeah, really rewarding, I think, as a researcher. And that's, that's a lot of what people have trouble with because you're supposed to, people have trouble saying, how can we know this is real when it's one person's perspective? And so maybe you need many portraitists to do that for one thing, to kind of be able to circle it or something. But it's something that I have questions about too, that I keep wanting to explore.
Sorry, that statement alone brings up this. I've worked in child welfare, and one of the things is now like the lived experience. And a part of it was you would have things not working in foster care, and they were like just the person living the experience like this doesn't work, but the system wouldn't move because there wasn't enough data. And then they do the data. It's like, oh well, we find out that if you place a kid in a group home, that really their experiences are going to be negative. Okay, let's do a research on that. And so now 10 years, 15 years later, wow, that actually is true.
All those kids have been in that situation.
In the situation. And so instead of like, as I said, I feel like portraiture is what I would consider like bleeding edge or cutting edge of thinking of, you can trust the person with the lived experience and that they have an experience that actually has learning points to it that are qualitative and not necessarily quantitative. You don't have to have 10 million people go through a horrible instance for you to know that instance was horrible. So I think in two parts, I think there's some truth to this, but also I feel like people are afraid of like that one person experience and maybe that's just them. And instead of looking at the system and really everybody has a unique experience that has pitfalls and positives.
Totally. Oh, I really appreciate that example, especially about the timeliness.
Yeah. It'd be really interesting though to think about the next, my concern with this is just the extent, the in-depthness of the understanding and how many people are willing to take that amount of time. It's a whole lot easier to just collect data. And yet, I also think that it's as much a self-portrait as it is a portrait of the other.
Yeah.
And so if you had, for the foster care example, how many, is there a way to sort of cut down on the amount of interviews that need to happen, but have it from 3 perspectives or something, so that it's not a huge study, but it's enough so you've got some different views on the situation, but it could happen in a shorter period of time, because I think that whole, even with just data collection, it takes decades. So how do you get a genuine portrait, but also have some multiple perspectives?
I think I'm really interested in because if the self-reflection is personal, what if you got a collective in a way?
Right.
So what is a collective? We're all here viewing this school or this portraiture through the lens of progressive teachers. Well, I'm not a progressive teacher. Where's the lens of conservative teachers? And then you have another similar set of data, and you can see how they're looking at it. Oh, well, the students are running around in class. Progressive teachers may look at that as a positive thing. Of the kids are, getting their freedom to be themselves. Sorry for using progressive, but conservative teachers no, students should be sitting down. There should be order, and those viewpoints are still valid. But you understand what lens they're being looked at.
Yeah.
So what decides what's good and what's not good?
Yeah.
But I also think in so many ways in those situations that what you find from the person you think is on the other side, that they may well see strengths that you don't see because your progressive lens doesn't let you say, oh, there's, these kids feel safe in this space. Yeah. Whereas we would say they feel safe skipping down the hall or whatever. And the depth or the breadth that brings to the portrait when you have other perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I once heard Dr. Lightfoot say that portraiture is it's really not a portrait of the institution or of the school or the person. It's a portrait of an encounter, which I really liked because it kind of captures that two-sidedness, and then you learn so much more when it is an encounter.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the conservative teachers probably aren't the ones going out doing in-depth portraits and writing nuanced, thoughtful literary pieces about them. But that's a good idea.
There could be a way. You know,
Yeah.
I think it's a tool, and anybody can use a tool if they so choose to use it. And I think the fallacy is that there are tools for people, and there's tools for other people, and I think no tools are for everybody. You just use it differently.
Well, and I mean, in the group home example, it would be sort of a fascinating one to have from the child, but then also from the group home leader, and what's their perspective of what's happening in this space, in terms of finding solutions or moving forward or whatever.
Yeah. I feel like you're kind of describing like an album or a catalog.
Exactly.
You know, like, yeah, you see it from all the different slices, and,
Right.
and just to see them side by side and be able to say, what's my reaction between the difference between this one and this one and this one and this one. And it's like,
Yes.
in that reaction that you actually learn the stuff. It's not like you actually need to find out some sort of concrete answer in the portrait. It's how does this make me react? How does it make you react? So it's like, yeah, it's material with which to have really good conversations. Okay, I'll do two quick examples of portraits that I'm really just going to hand out so you can read later, and then a couple discussion prompts. Okay, so the first, and this is really, I appreciate that you guys are bringing up this question of like adaptability. Like no one can really do the full thing all the time, but what are the many versions of it? And so I'll give you the first example of, a traditional full depth version of portraiture, and then the second one is more of an adapted kind of condensation of it. So at Outer Coast, the thing that I was super interested in was what is the impact of communal living in a school? Does it do anything? Why does it work? Why did I feel like it had so much to offer? And being able to really kind of concretize that and say, how do I measure the impact of this? And what is it producing in students? And so I wrote, I did a bunch of interviews and field work, and wrote this, I don't know how long it was, 15-page kind of narrative portrait of communal living at Outer Coast. And the use for this, I'm hoping to use it as a design document for the staff team, for them to be able to read it and be like, okay, like this is what communal living at Outer Coast looks like. How can we design it better? How can we design our supports better? I hope that students also read it. I think a lot of time we think of education research as like, and then you go give it to the people behind the scenes. But like, I want more students to be reading the research that's being written about them and having all sorts of conversations about how other people are seeing and portraying them. So I really hope that in every orientation, thank you so much for attending. Have a safe flight back.
Yes, thanks.
Here, I'll give you these two handouts.
Oh, yes, and I just left my email with Frank there, so that
perfect.
I can share everything
Thank
with
you so much.
Thank you.
And then also, maybe someday someone wants to publish it, just, pipe dream, but if we could communicate to the wider world the really cool stuff that's happening when communal living and schools get combined, maybe that will spark an idea in someone. So here's that. Just to read if you feel like it. And then the condensed version, so at workshop school, basically the time is huge. I was at grad school and was able to write this as like a capstone paper. That's the only reason I have time to do all this. And so my role at Outer Coast now, at Workshop U, was really lucky that they had a little bit of grant funding that could fund me to be doing this sort of creative, non-traditional impact research. So it is part of my job to do this work at Workshop U, but the time is limited. So I did a really condensed version of this. Part of the Workshop U program is a coaching endeavor where students meet with a credentialed coach. If any of you have heard like executive coaching, where executives get professional support, It's not mentorship, it's not therapy, it's a very specific type of kind of empowerment conversation. So students meet with a coach, and then they also do peer coaching. So we have groups of students who are learning how to do that kind of coaching, questioning with each other to help them, better live through the program and achieve their goals. So we, like I said, this is the first year that we're doing this, and so someone had an idea 2 months ago about what the coaching program should look like, and then it really happened, and then we were like, oh wow, we need to redesign this. But we wanted like some sort of meat, some sort of hard evidence or stuff to be able to really thoughtfully redesign it. And so I did the same interviews and field observations, and I basically organized all of my notes and put it into this kind of condensed memo that has a little bit of analysis and then basically all of the student quotes that I was working from. But I didn't turn it into like a full-on story portrait. And that's okay. We still used this for some of our design sessions, and it really, it had its limitations and it had its opportunities, but it was the stuff that we all read before we got in the room together to say, what are we going to do differently?
When you're talking to students, were you asking the same questions? Were you just letting them talk?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a whole bank of all the 100 questions that I wanted to ask. And I tried to hit upon another kind of part of the rigor of portraiture is figuring out what is consistent. Like in regular research, it's like you ask the same questions in the same way because you want all of the same stuff, so you can be extra sure that everything is the same. But with portraiture, you have to balance the consistency with the kind of human, like all the follow-up questions. You want to pull threads based on an individual student, what you know about them. There's so much different that you can explore with every student that will be value to the overall conception of how the program worked. So I did a fair amount of trying to hold to consistent areas, but every conversation looked wildly different. Yeah, so this is like, I would say, a medium version where it still took time and resources, but it was a little bit easier.
Is the number after the quotations, like this is student 4, this
Yeah.
is student 11,
Yeah.
this is student 7, okay.
Mm-hmm. There were like 15 students interviewed for this document. And yeah, I wouldn't say that this is like the authentic truth of the coaching program. All of this, the beauty of it is that it's really imperfect, but I do think that it gave us some place to start. I think it's a really good place to start from when you're thinking about school redesign. So, yeah, I think the questions that I am left with after trying this work out 2 different ways, and I'm not Dr. Lawrence Lightfoot, I'm just studying this and trying to learn more about how to do this well. And I think the questions I'm left with is, A, like once you have people read a work of portraiture, what do the internal design sessions look like? What is the way that you use this stuff to have a conversation? That I think is still a big question mark in my mind. 2 is how to basically bolster the validity and credibility of this method as rigorous, even if it's not completely scientific, to say that this is substantive. Dr. Lawrence Lightfoot, she's retired now. She's still, fighting for people to see this work as important. But I wonder, like, how do we have that conversation with the world? Where can we pick up where she left off and keep kind of exploring, what portraiture is? And then 3, like, what does it look like for most schools that have no resources, no capacity, but are still hopefully engaging in some sort of reflection or design work, each in their own individual context? Like, is there anything from this that can be used in real schools, like under the constraints of normal life? So those are the questions I kind of want to talk about today with everyone. We have about half an hour left. So, yeah, I guess if there's any more questions, feel free to ask them, but otherwise, we can take a minute to look at these prompts, and I'd love to just have like a roundtable discussion for the last while.
So do you mean questions in general, or questions about? All right.
I think any. Yeah, I'll tell you mine. Here, you can also. Here.
As you go through this process, we talked about the research phase as being, 10 years to find out something. and then you also reflected on like, you know, you wish the students were engaging with the research as well. It makes me think of like, as you're developing these portraitures, how do you respond to it? Like, how is there a response to it? Because usually, in my mind, I'm not a researcher, but I think of you do 5 years doing some type of research and then you synthesize it and you put your findings out, and that's when people respond to it. But is there a way, I feel like portraiture gives you an end point, or like an end to point, not end, end point, to say, oh, I'm seeing you're going through this and how you're pinning it out in your encounter. I have questions, or how do we respond while someone is in process? And is that derailing the process, or is that a part of it?
And I just think that this is so helpful, just as you're even thinking about your own school system personally, right? Like, how are you can use this information that you're noticing and bring that into conversations when it comes to time to redesign. You know, if you're looking to see, are we innovative? Are we doing the things that we say we want to do? Are we meeting our mission? Have some, take the time to interview the students and then look at it and see, well, I know what our mission is supposed to be. Are we meeting it through what I'm hearing from the students and their families and other stakeholders? And then it can help with just conversation. It doesn't have to be like something that is like, this is my dissertation, But although I'm about to start my doctoral program in the fall, and I'm just interested to see, like, is this something that's going to come up when we talk about qualitative research? Will it be discussed? Will it not? Is it something that would be embraced? Would it not? It's interesting.
It also, there seems to, the thing that strikes me is sort of the need for it to be timely, because if you do your interviews and then it takes you 2 years or 5 years to synthesize and pull it together, the situation, it's a different set of students, a different set of teachers, and so that there's a real need to sort of do your move on.
Right. Because it's a snapshot.
Because
every
it's a
portrait
snapshot.
is a snapshot in time.
Exactly, and so
How many hours did this take?
That's a good question. I had to complete it for my class, so a lot of the insight did come from my own, 3-4 years
there,
with students. So this was a week of interviews and field observations. Not a full week, but just kind of.
But built
off the
on
cuff.
years of.
Built on a lot of experience. But most teachers or people I hope will be doing portraiture work, like, it's not that you just have to cordon off, what did I hear from this student in this instance?
Right.
You're able to also pull from your experience, and write that in to say, this is what I heard and saw from this student, and I'm remembering this other example, and combined, this makes me analyze the situation like this.
So you're looking.
But I wrote it in like 3 days because I had to for the class.
So if that was your job, though, right? Like, if your job was to, let's take a month and look at the school and write up something, so because we're going to meet and we're going to talk about whether or not we're meeting our goals, it could be done.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't have to be over a 5-year process or something.
And this is, I guess, something that's interesting to me about portraiture and how it might be more transportable than other forms of research, is that most other forms of research would pretty strongly caution against someone who works for an organization doing research on that organization because of the inherent researcher bias. Like, I would, in my doctoral program, I would never go back and study Outer Coast, because they'd be like, you have rose colored glasses, don't do that. And so I guess when you're thinking about adaptability, like, are you thinking about this being like an external researcher coming in to conduct a portrait, or rather like empowering someone within an organization to describe their encounter and their relationships within something they're already a part of?
I do have a specific question. The 5 key elements, the context, voice, relationship, emergent themes, and aesthetic whole. What is aesthetic whole? like some of these things I was like, all right, I see, and maybe I should read the book. But I was like, that.
Yeah, that's an elusive question. I feel like I think about that a lot. I guess, like, I think her main point was that the hardest job of every researcher is to say, what do you leave out and what do you put in? Because you're going to see so much and you're going to have so much data, and it's up to you to kind of select things and not be selective. to say, oh, I'm saying this narrative of the story because I'm only cherry picking this data. But at the same time, you can never put everything that you think and observe and have as data into a portrait, or else it would be monumental. So I think her desire for the aesthetic whole is to say, you know, you have to make really strategic choices about what you're choosing to include in your portrait. The only thing that really matters is that at the end of the day, do you feel like it is capturing the aesthetic whole? Do you feel like it gets at the essence of this thing? And if it gets at the essence, it's okay if you left that one part out, or it's okay if you focus more on this. Like, if you feel like it was said, you know, and someone's gonna receive it the way you feel like it happened, like that's what she cares about as a researcher. So that's how she uses the term, but I still think about like what that means, and while I was writing these, it was just a constant question. Like I read my final draft, I'm like, does this capture the aesthetic whole? Like in some ways yes, in some ways no. But I think it's like the thing you should be striving for, I guess.
Well, even if you think about accreditation process, because you know,
Well,
it's a big undertaking. Like, how could something like this be beneficial for the people that are on the committee that are, you know, I think this could be beneficial because here's lived experience, and then here's the data that we have that shows whatever else we're trying to show. But this gives a fuller picture of what's happening. Because you're trying to show that in the accreditation process. You're trying to not only just give the numbers, you're trying to show them what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that like I don't know if I can imagine in this moment a world in which portraiture will be the thing that people use as measurement and evaluation, but is it in addition, like a meaningful addition to other forms of research, and maybe that's its place. I would love, here's a couple discussion questions, but I think rather than going through these one by one, I think the gist of what I'm really curious is to like take examples that we all are thinking of in our own school context and to kind of use this group to brainstorm, like, what are those examples that you feel like this could be relevant or resonant to in some way? And like, when rubber meets the road, like, what's it gonna look like? What's a tiny version of it that you could imagine? And can we kind of help each other think through, are there any lessons learned to be had from this conversation on the work that you have maybe been thinking of in context? So I don't know if anyone has an example of something they want to share.
I mean, we're kind of a startup, what we're doing. So we've been a face-to-face private school for 50 years. So we're always looking to be innovative. We're never like stuck on, we've arrived, but we're doing really well, but we're always looking forward. But in that looking forward, even before the pandemic started, we started an online school to allow other students that may not have enough kids in their schools to take an AP course to be able to take an AP course with us. And so it started with high school and is built down into elementary. And so that's one of the roles that I have. And so just thinking about as we're, you know, in like year 5 of this and how we've expanded to offer like 100 courses when we started with 5.
Wow.
And, you know, and I've created some of those courses and teach them, and just kind of how, you know, we think we're being successful, we're moving the needle, but like just to understand people's experiences and to help us know like, okay, here's an area that we still need to work on. I mean, we seek out that feedback, we get that feedback, but this is just interesting to have it kind of all tied together in a document. You know?
Yeah, and in an online space too, where like the encounters are maybe not as, or it's not as obvious how students are engaging or reacting or growing through the experience. So have a real concerted effort to connect with students in that way too.
So I would be curious, how would you go about developing a portrait for K-12 online? I mean, who are the people that you would want to be talking to?
I think you want to talk to the teachers, you want to talk to the students' families. I think other schools that they might go to afterwards to see how prepared they were. Talking to kids that have graduated out of the program to see how they felt, like how did it impact their college experience, having already had experience with, I have a million questions.
No, well, mine is sort of like, I get all of those, but it's like how many people in that experience do you need to interview to develop an authentic portrait? Because you could think of, you know, okay, I want 3 students at every grade level and, you know, 3 parents at every grade level. And I mean, I think so I'm just curious what how you go about it.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, I don't think there are any rules, even in the big book. But I wonder if it's just really like, because I think I only care about portraiture if it can work for real schools.
Right.
I wonder if it's just about taking your resources and capacity and shifting the portrait to what is actually viable. Because I think there's two conversations that I hope for in the future of portraiture. A, how can we take all this stuff and fit it to the actual time and space we have? Or how do we get other people to care enough about it to fund it and create more time and capacity?
Right.
And I think the first is maybe an easier and more short-term endeavor than the second.
Right.
So if this was happening right now, I think whatever you have, like there could be a meaningful portrait from that. And it doesn't mean it's the full truth and the all everything, like no portrait will be. But if it can provide you with some sort of insight, I think it's a portrait worth writing. So even if it's 3 students, even if it's 10 hours of time, I think as long as we're prefacing portraits in an appropriate way, so people don't feel like I'm trying to tell you what's happening in all of these ways, we're just saying, with the time I had, I wanted to create something that would help us think about this in a more human way.
And
I think it could be small.
And are the interviews always in person?
I don't think they have to be. I think they lend a lot to the relationship that you can build between the interviewer and the subject.
Right. No, I was just thinking with something like this,
I think
an interview that a written one that you give to all your 8th graders, or you give to, so that you get more of that. Because I did think that when you were talking about the coaching and just having the descriptions from the kids, then having, that's a lot to reflect on, or the parents. But if it has to be, I'm talking to you, then that cuts down on the number, and maybe that's okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
So you said that you've met Dr. Lightfoot. Have you, does she know that you were wanting to carry on the baton? Have you had that conversation with her?
I have not.
Who is the person that she's kind of left to carry on the legacy? Is it you?
No, I wish. She
Could it be you?
She has kind of an apprentice of sorts. She used to teach a class at the grad school that she was working at about portraiture, and she would instruct people in these methods. And one of her students then became the teacher of the class once she retired. So there's a woman named Dr. Irene Leifschitz who's kind of a mentor to me. I took her class. And now, who knows what'll happen. But so Irene, I think it's really one person that kind of takes it and carries the legacy.
I wonder, do you think you could, I guess maybe offline, share a version of your semi-structured interview script and an example of a transcript that you've notated? I think that could be really interesting to see. Where do you start from going into one of those interviews, and then when you have just this audio transcript, I think you're using Otter or something, how are you then actually sitting down with that data and performing that analysis? Because I think there's a magic there that is the literary mode, but I think it could be helpful to see how that process actually works.
Totally. Yeah, the process of synthesizing, like I said, I think all of portraiture exists mainly in the synthesis of those transcripts. And I do use a AI transcriptor so that every word is captured, because I think that's important. But the process for me writing at least the big narrative portrait was so wild. I had 6 screens open. It was transcript over here, notes over here, field data over here, the Word document over here, and it's just it's you were saying portraiture as in photography or painting, you're really trying to get at something that is really a piece of art, and so it feels like there's no real step-by-step approach. You just have to sit there, take it in, and be how am I gonna take this and paint the thing? So it was a lot of just staring at it all until the themes emerge. And she has a lot of good work on how do you capture patterns and emergent themes, as she calls them. It was hard and often looked kind of like a crazy process. And I'm sure once you get better at it, you develop systems. Dr. Lightfoot has written maybe 10 different portraits. And she actually moved on from the education world a little bit. She's written a portrait of her mother as a person, trying to capture the aesthetic whole of her mother, who's a remarkable woman. She's written portraits of concepts, she wrote a portrait of the concept of the relationship between parents and their aging children, and captured that as best as she could. So I'm sure, yeah, she kind of talked about how with each new portrait, she figured out her personal way of capturing those themes and felt like she had some sort of system or structure so that it didn't feel so crazy for her as a researcher. But yeah, it's personal.
And I mean, that personal aspect of it really gets to me, because sometimes I feel like, or at least when I was a kid in education, you would have these standards of success that would feel inapplicable. Like, I remember taking the gifted test, and I was like, okay, I could be gifted. It wasn't even something that I like wanted to or even thought about, but they sprung it upon me. This is in Savannah, Georgia. And the only thing I really remember about the test is the gifted, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna be chosen. And I had to take some tests, and I really didn't know what the test, but I love drawing, so like in the gifted test you could draw. And so I drew, and I think I was like 0.1 off or something like that. And they were like, we're just gonna accept you anyway. But that 0.1, like, I was like so close. I was like, well, what did I miss? Like, and it wasn't like a conversation, or like I didn't even know who or what entity was like saying that. Yeah, I was judging me. I just knew that I was 0.1 off, but I still got accepted in the program anyway. And that means that I was in a special class with other kids who were considered in a special class. And that whole process informs me of like education, or how I should be thinking about education from the very forward on. And I definitely was a 0.1 off, because and everything else, because I was just like, I'm in this class with all these kids that are smart. They're teachers, there's teachers' kids and whatnot. And I really don't really care about education, in a way of like, I want to draw. Like, that's, as a kid, I was like, all I want to do is draw. And so I just think about like the personal aspect of it, and then the systems that you impose onto other people, and how much insight you think. And the thing said, it's a mirror for those in it, and an external window for those on the outside.
And how did knowing that you were a point off help you in any way? Like that share. That just kind of covers it for you.
Right.
Like,
I think that's really insightful about how like we have these systems that are supposed to measure things accurately, but then there's the human element where someone just met you and was like, well, yeah, we're gonna put you in the program anyway. Like, we did all this work to get the data, and then it didn't matter because their relationship with you, their seeing you, whatever, was more powerful than the data they collected. And that happens all the time.
I think for me, I was like, it's because I can draw good. I'm not gifted in academics, but in drawing, yes. Yes. I'll go to the higher level class. But I think when we think about data, like that story is, or in storytellings, that's what brings us to want to read stories and care about why these qualitative metrics are being assessed, because there are people behind those numbers, and those people have impact and will have impact on others. And if you can cultivate impact, you can do a lot of good.
Okay. Well, we're a couple minutes out. This has been super interesting. I have one last quote to share with you, but thank you guys so much for listening to this and engaging with it. And yeah, I really love
really interesting.
hearing the different applications. So thank you all for such a good conversation. The last quote I wanted to put up was just a concept that I think I loved the most out of the Art and Science of Portraiture book, which was trying to describe like why is portraiture different than other social scientific research methods. And it basically says portraiture explores goodness. And so much research actually stems, like the initial question you ask is like, why the bad thing's bad? And you go and you diagnose it. But very few times do researchers start with why the good things are good. And I think like that kind of asset framing with schools and with research is really important. So I'll just read this quote that I really love from her about goodness. In these portraits, goodness is seen as a holistic dimension whose interpretation requires an embeddedness in context. Through these portraits, one also recognizes that goodness is imperfect and changing. One of the persistent problems with social scientists' pursuit of effective schools or their critique of poor schools is that they often view them as static and judge them against perceived standards of perfection. The assumption is that no school will ever achieve perfection. It is inconceivable that any institution would ever establish an equilibrium that satisfied all of its inhabitants, where values closely match behaviors, where there is no tension between tradition and change. Even the most impressive schools show striking moments of vulnerability, inconsistency, and awkwardness. That's very true. It is not the absence of weakness that marks a good school, but how school attends to that weakness. So when she was writing The Good High School, she was starting with something where she's like, why are these things so good? Like, these high schools are really working. But in the portrait, it's filled with vulnerability, inconsistency, and awkwardness. It's not this like rose-colored, like, oh, this is the beacon, like you're on a pedestal, what you're doing is working. Like, it's actually a really complex portrait that she puts out, and you read it and you're like, wait, this is supposed to be a good school. And you realize that, yeah, maybe it's about how it attends to the weakness, not that it's all good all the time. So, yeah, I hope all of you will go about looking for money goodness in your school context, and thank you for sharing little tidbits with us today.
You said you could share this PowerPoint? There's a lot of things that you need to like look up.
We have a QR code up here if you want to scan to get our slides, I think, in PDF form. So we're just going to introduce ourselves. My name is Lindsay Kellen. I'm the Director of Ed Tech and Libraries at Garrison Forest, and we all teach in the middle school. So I teach middle school digital thinking classes. I'm an advisor in the middle school as well.
I'm Shannon Schmidt. I am the head of the middle school at Garrison Forest. This is my 9th year there. So when I worked in Baltimore City Schools before, and then when I came, I was what was called the academic resource coordinator, so kind of doing like learning support and curriculum support, and then I moved into the head of the middle school role, I guess, 5 years ago now. And I teach a 6th grade seminar course and an 8th grade capstone course.
And I am Sydney Carter. I'm our 6th grade and 7th grade math teacher in the middle school at Garrison Forest. I'm also an alum of Garrison Forest as well. This is my 2nd year teaching there.
This is my 3rd year at Garrison. My 5th EduCon. You're second.
My first.
This is my 3rd.
Oh, you're 3rd. Oh, 3rd. Okay. So we wanted to share a little bit about our school because we're not really in this area. So we're just outside of Baltimore, about 20, 30 minutes outside of Baltimore. We're an all-girls school, preschool, actually daycare through 12th grade. So we have a campus in a very unassuming place that when you drive by it, you would have no idea there's a campus there, but it's a beautiful campus. Each division, pre, lower, middle, and upper, is in a separate building. And we also have a significant boarding population, so about a quarter of our upper school and also a few middle schoolers, 8th graders, are boarding there, and a good portion of that are international boarders as well. Mostly from China, Mexico.
More Europe this year too.
More Europe this year too. What else should I say about Garrison?
And you were on campus.
Oh, and I live on campus, so
Yes.
like 5 years ago, I moved on campus with my family. So there are, I think, about maybe 30 faculty members who live on campus. You know, some are single and live in the dorms. I actually live there with my husband and my 2 kids, so we're in a house on campus.
We all actually have daughters that go to Garrison from the twos class to the seniors, so we've got but that since we don't have a huge group, maybe we just take a second. If you guys could just go around and tell us what school you're at and what grade level you teach, that'd be helpful. Just I feel like for us to know as we're talking, since we are all middle school. I do think what we're talking about though could easily be applied to upper or lower as well. I think it's middle school specific. Should we maybe start there?
I'm Hadley Ferguson. I'm retired from middle school history teaching at an all-girls school.
Do you have a daughter who went to Trinity?
I do. Katie.
Yes! I went to school with her. I see her retweet your stuff. Yes. Trinity. Yeah.
Jeez. That is a very small world.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've been coming to EduCon for years. I was one of the founders of the EdCamp movement, if you've heard of that, and I left the classroom to run the EdCamp Foundation in 2016, and then I retired from there. So.
Hi, I'm Christina. I actually teach at SLA at Beaver in West Philly. I teach students in 9th and 11th grade English.
I'm Charlie. I'm at West Springfield High School in Northern Virginia, and I'm an 11th grader.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah.
I'm Mark Miles. I am the Deeper Learning Coordinator at Rochester Public School District in Rochester, Minnesota. However, prior to that, and for that I worked with teams from early childhood to 12th grade, building meaningful experiences for kids. But prior to that, I used to teach here at SLA Center City, back in the other building, and I used to teach students math, computer science, creative writing, and drama. So.
I'm Hillary. I'm at the school district's virtual academy. I run academic support for math and science 6 through 12.
My name is Lee. I work for an education technology nonprofit called Assistance. That's an outgrowth of Worcester Polytech Institute, which is in Massachusetts, although I am a lifelong Philadelphian, which I'm rapidly giving up the title as I now live in Delaware. A long-time enthusiast and supporter of what happens here at SLA.
I'm Tammy Hughes. I'm from Atlanta, Greater Atlanta Christian School. I teach English high school. I've taught all levels in high school, and also in our online platform as well. I've been there forever.
My name is Kristen Wright. I also teach at Greater Atlanta Christian. I teach middle school social studies, American history.
My name is Katrina White, and I teach
GAC as well, and I teach 3rd grade at halftime, and then I'm an associate academic dean for our online school, which covers 4th grade through 12th grade. The rest of the time.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is An Win, and I'm assistant superintendent for the school district of Philadelphia, and I oversee all the SLAs. So.
Welcome. Nice to have
Awesome. So we're going to take you through kind of our journey and trying to incorporate more interdisciplinary learning at Garrison, and then specifically like what projects do we do with each grade level, and then kind of our journey like moving forward and looking ahead a little bit. So, Shannon.
Yeah, so I know you guys are all here because you probably see the value of interdisciplinary learning, but for us, that was something that the teachers really felt like we always talked about wanting to do more of, but it was like, how do we do it? Because there's just not enough time to plan together, how does it fit within the schedule? And so it kind of just kept being something that we talked about and we couldn't really get off the ground when I first came to Garrison, but we wanted to do it because we knew it would increase engagement. We knew that kids would start to see, okay, well, I don't just write in English class or in history class, and I don't just do math in math class. And really, we were doing a lot of work a few years ago around learning that sticks. And we had some cross-divisional, cross-departmental groups working on that. And through that, there was a lot of good ideas, but in the end, it kind of was like, well, let's start this in the middle school, because the middle school team, I would say, was probably the most excited and the most on board. And so that is, where we kind of kicked it off. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can just turn and talk for a second. What does interdisciplinary learning look like currently at your school? There is another slide that says, like, what are some of the challenges you're facing? Let's just take a couple of minutes and, chat with, and I know you guys are at the same school, so.
Well, we're actually elementary.
Oh, okay, so you can. I mean, I feel like, just what does it look like? What challenges are you facing? Let's chat for a couple of minutes.
I feel like it's on the side of the
Our teachers all work in their teams on a subject, and there's very little communication between the teams.
Are the names?
I feel like
That's exactly
so she,
the regular
when I
teachers
started,
she
she
was
was
the
my role, and she had moved to California, she's retired, but she's who first brought me to EduCon.
Yes, and so it's super interesting. So when I was an instructional coach, I created PLCs that were cross curricular, and one of them, and it was all by choice, and one of the groups, which I wasn't sure I was going to be able to create, was cross curricular projects. But luckily I found out, like, oh, they all have the same prep. This is perfect. So I'm going to create this super group, and they'll work together. And halfway through the year, they're like, well, we don't even know how to do this. We don't have. I'm like, what I had found out is they hadn't even had the discussion to discover that they all taught the same grade level and all had a common prep to work together. So like there is this weird mentality of I'm in my silo, I'm in my lane, and being able to break that down, and that's ingrained. So being able to break down that silo, and that wall, and that's a huge challenge because, and I think one of the big issues is in the past schools never prioritized that, and at the high school level, if you don't prioritize having those conversations across the disciplines, just having the conversations, let alone creating a project, just like building that relationship, I mean, that's not going to happen.
So my previous role at an organization I worked for was creating performance tests. So they were more authentic types of projects. We used it to create them for assessment purposes, and they were, because they were real world cases, they were interdisciplinary by nature. And it was a huge challenge. It was an absolute huge challenge. Teachers would get into it and realize that they could use support from other content areas. So for example, if an advanced math teacher was creating a performance task, and the idea was,
be commercially driven.
you know, you're an editor for Architectural Digest. The edition for Dex is coming out. You know, we need you to make sure that the submissions are going to mathematically support what they say they're going to support. And then, you know, there's creative writing, and, you know, the hope was that they would reach out to outside of their silo. But it's a hard thing because there was no foundation for, hey, we're going to do this. And it's good.
Any takeaways? Anything kind of that you want to share? Is interdisciplinary learning, is some of it happening at most of the schools? And are there some challenges?
When you say, I think my definition might be a little skewed on that, because I took interdisciplinary as Tammy as a language arts teacher, us working together. Hey, I'm studying World War II in history. You guys read Anne Frank. Is there any way you guys can read Anne Frank when I'm? That's how I took it. Yeah. Or is it I am during our World War II unit? I'm going to be pulling in writing and reading and possibly some math and what. So I think I'm a little confused.
I think it could be either.
Feels like
okay.
Yeah, it's like both and.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it kind of depends on your school and the setup. Like I know when we toured was it SLAM? They had like a humanities block, right? So there was some of that kind of built in.
Right.
At our school, it is more English, history. So it is more teachers collaborating, and you know, because the blocks are pretty small, like short, to be able to do it across multiple classes.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. So what we kind of tried to do over the last few years, so we'll walk you through the timeline, but we started out deciding we were going to have these signature projects in each grade level. So we have 2 signature projects in each grade level that are like bigger in scope, that are interdisciplinary. They're really different, and that's kind of, it is very intentional and on purpose. So we have a fall project and a spring project in 7th and 8th, and then in 6th grade we actually do both in the spring, just because fall of 6th grade, the kids are so new, it's hard to do any changes.
And 6th grade is the first year of middle school, I know something is 5th grade, 6 years is the first year.
Yeah, so we give them until the spring. And so we started these signature projects a couple of years ago, and we kind of built, we'll talk about that. And then when I moved into this role, I really wanted one thing that you'll hear from us as it's been a challenge is how do we share this out? We're doing a good job now, but we're not sharing it as well with families. And with prospective families. And so we kind of came up with what is the big picture in each grade. So in 6th grade, it really is creating a vision for the future. So students take an environmental engineering class, that's their science class. They take a human geography class, that's their history class. So what's tying it all together? So we've created these like lovely graphics that I love, and we update them every year. Like,
Should we go through some?
We were looking at it yesterday, and Cindy was like, "We don't do." I'm like, "I change it every year. We're growing. I didn't update the slide." So this is from last year, but 7th grade is more exploring our community because that's when our girls do U.S. history. So they do a U.S. history class. We do a big signature program in that grade. It's called the Women in Impact Speaker Series. So we have alums come back and share probably monthly about their different career paths and what impact they're having in whatever field they decided to go into. We really try to be intentional about the field trips that we're taking. We have all of our students take a class with the counselor. So those are our decision-making classes. We have an advisory program. So trying to tie it all together so it doesn't just feel like we're doing a lot of cool things, but there's some intentionality behind it. And then 8th grade, that's when our boarding students start. So we tend to get some international students there. So really expanding our world. We used to have 8th grade was an ancient civ class. Now it's a global citizenship class, which the kids really, really, really like. Teachers really like. So that has been great. So, just kind of getting them to think bigger. The capstone class, I teach a section of that, and that is the girls really, we follow the TED Ed curriculum, and they develop a TED Talk on a topic of their choosing, and they deliver it to the whole middle school. So in 6th and 7th, they do a semester of dance and a semester of theater, and then in 8th, they do a semester of dance and a semester of capstone, so more public speaking. So this is all a work in progress, but this is sort of what we're trying to do and really think about the connections between all the things that we're doing.
And then the signature project that we're about to talk about specifically are like 1/4 of that. So bigger puzzle.
Yes. So we're going to kind of walk through what what those projects are in 6th grade, and 7th grade, and 8th grade, you'll see some of them are like it happens in science mostly, happens in math, and then it comes together for like a one-day thing. Some of the projects are we take a whole week off from classes and just do the project. So there's big, there's small, there's kind of like a mix of it all. So Sid, you want to talk about 6th grade?
Yes, so 6th grade STEM Day is their first signature project that they'll do. And so this really comes from their unit in their science, which Shannon mentioned is environmental engineering in 6th grade, and then we culminate with the STEM Day. So most of the learning and activities is taking place in their science class.
Oh yeah,
thank you. That's fine. Yeah. So the logistics of our actual STEM day. So it's a one-day competition, and it doesn't go the entire school day for this one. It's like a 10 to 2. So it's part of their day. And we actually partner with a boys' school in Baltimore. So we alternate each year. One year they come on our campus, the following year we go to their campus. So our science teacher there and the science teacher at boys' school sort of coordinate with each other to get the day organized and planned and make sure we're all ready to go. So before STEM Day, there's a big unit, about a month long, in their science class, and this is where they're learning how to build a propeller car, the catapult, and then gliders. So they split up into teams and groups, and a lot of testing and using that design thinking and figuring out what works, what doesn't, how can we change this, because the point is that on STEM Day, they actually get to compete that and see whose is going to be the most accurate or goes the furthest distance, or and they're competing against the ones that the boys are building in their science classes as well.
And we always win.
So then for the actual schedule on STEM Day, so they're breaking up into their teams. They'll come in, they'll do a little, that's their icebreaker, team name, like get a little camaraderie.
The icebreaker is important because our girls are not used, a lot of them are
yeah,
used to only being in class with girls, so they get like a little poofy when boys come, so we need to kind of like, no one talks, it's weird for a little while, we gotta do some kind of research.
We gotta bridge back out a little bit there, yeah. And then in the morning, they'll rotate through stations. So if you could picture us in our gym, the actual competition piece is one station with their teams where they'll actually collect how far did that go, did it go through the hoop, how accurate, all that. And then another station is a challenge to build a bridge, and another station is to build a tower. We'll break through lunch, and then there's one more activity that they hadn't gotten through yet. So they'll do that one, and then there's actually winners of each category that they'll announce at the end of the day, which is very exciting to see which team and who got really close and second and things like that. And so that's sort of how the day is structured ultimately at the end. Their second project, which is a little bit later in the spring at the end of the year, is their team activism project. So this one was sort of like we were saying, they might do this in one class and this in the other class and sort of bring it all together. That might be more what this project is. So for teen activism, they actually spend about a month in book clubs in their English class. And so they're using the Reader's Workshop Social Issues book club. And so each book club group has a different topic. Maybe it's bullying, maybe it's animal welfare, but they're reading a novel about that. And then in their geography class, they're doing actual research. And so our geography teacher will partner also with the librarian who will come in and practice how do we research, how do we take notes, how do we organize a research paper on this same topic that I'm reading about in my book club in English class. And then in the digital thinking class, what Lindsay teaches, they're actually using the movie making time to actually figure out how do we use this software to make a movie, because on their final culminating day is the PSA day. So they make a public service announcement about whatever their topic was. And that's sort of what that final culminating day is, the PSA day. So they're in their teams, the same group that they read their book club with, same people that they were writing their research paper, so same group of kids. And then they actually come together and make their movie, start to finish, all in one day, so no classes for 6th grade that day, and then they get to watch each other's at the end of the day. So that one's sort of like, for 6th grade, it's more of a culminating day, and this one sort of appears for about a month long in each of these different classes.
So it's a lot easier if scheduling is a hard thing, or for teachers to give up time, they can just incorporate that in the English class, in the geography, in the digital thinking, and then it's just one day, which is really, not too hard for kids or for adults. And so that day is, busy and crazy. They're running on campus, they're filming, they're excited, but it's fun too.
Right. So I think a big part of both STEM Day and the PSA Day are just sort of like fun is happening at the same time. All the learning is coming together in this culminating thing, but it's a lot of fun for 6th grade.
And then the only other thing I would add is too also that like I said, these change and grow every year. So like a lot of years we've had like guest speakers to come in to talk about like teen activism. So we may have, a parent that year who knows someone, so we'll bring that. We had a judge who, came in and talked about something. We had, last year we actually, and I think she's coming in this year, we have one of our alums who's at Northwestern, Taishia, she zoomed in and really she does a lot of social justice work as a college student, so she really talked about, that agency that kids have, and they loved hearing from her. Last year we had a new geography teacher, and she really wanted to take the kids on a trip to the State House in Annapolis, and they got to sit in on sessions, and so we did that last year, so I think we're doing that again this year. So, it really does kind of grow and morph each year, which is exciting too.
So 7th grade does 2 projects. So the first one is Project Innovate, and that happens in November. This one is different from the 6th grade because it's usually a week where we have 4 days. It's usually around Thanksgiving break, and we have like a day off, and then we have 4 days. So we do it during that week where they have 4 days where they do not have any regular classes at all. So we're really lucky that Shannon, being our division head, allows us that time of not having regular classes. And what's nice, one thing that's nice about Project Innovate is that I don't want to say there's not any prep, there's prep in the scheduling, but there's nothing necessarily specific that they're learning in their classes for Project Innovate. However, at the same time, it's bringing in research skills and video or presentation skills, public speaking, all kinds of different things. So it's a little bit different than the 6th grade. But basically in Project Innovate, they pick an area at Garrison Forest that they'd like to improve. So for example, maybe how can we connect our community more? How can we, last year our winning group, redesign flexible seating in our building. So how can we get more flexible seating in there? We've had groups design a course that they wanted to take that we've been able to implement. How do we
make the campus more welcoming?
Make campus more welcoming with so many international students, all kinds of
pollinators, there's
lots of environmental things all over the place.
Yeah.
When we originally were brainstorming it, we're like, we should have them not do it at Garrison Forest, but let's have them solve this big world problem. And then the problem with that was I'll talk about it in a minute, but we do get funding then to implement the winning project, and we can't really get funding to solve the world problem. So it's nice.
And it kind of fits that theme for the year about our community.
Yes, and so exactly. So that's nice. And then they work for a week with their group. We'll talk about that, and then they do a big presentation in front of a Shark Tank style, kind of with the judges lined up. It's our head of school, Shannon, or a bunch of people from our leadership team that they have to present in front of a really formal presentation and in front of the whole school. So like I said, it's 4 days, and the way that we kind of have planned, it's actually, I'm the one that kind of runs this project, and I don't want to say there's no planning in advance, but we've been doing this now for 7 years?
No,
9 years.
Our first year we started.
And of course we make little tweaks here and there, but really it's just setting up the schedule, and then there's not a ton of prep work for it once we've done it the first time. So that's kind of nice. So we do have planning time. We have Friday morning PD, so the students start an hour late on Fridays. They come in at 9, teachers start at 7:45, so we have meeting time. And Shannon's great about giving us, usually every meeting we have, about half of it we work on signature projects. So we brainstorm the topics. Sometimes they're reused from year to year, sometimes we throw different ones in there, set up the judging panel. We kick it off to students and have them take a little survey about what topics they like. And then we make a schedule of kind of all the things that are happening. These are the different things that happen on each of the 4 days specifically. So we make just a Google Doc schedule of, okay, we're doing team building here, then they're gonna be working with their groups. Then we had an alum come in from Under Armour to talk about problem solving in her workplace and just kind of, give them kind of a real world connection. And teachers just kind of sign up when they're free to kind of cover that piece. If they would be teaching 7th grade, they're with them that period. And also, teachers at our school, we're really lucky, are great about just I'll pop in for a little bit, I'll help with that. So They're getting extensive feedback. We are taking notes, like giving them but it's good because it's like a first draft of a paper, and they take it back and they have a whole day to implement that.
And they're like,
they
oh,
panic.
we're not gonna be ready.
We know the highs and lows of this because they're working with the same group of, usually it's 4 for 4 days. Like that's a lot. They usually do a second run through the morning before the presentations and then the final presentations. And it always somehow really comes together. I cry because they're good and it's so good.
And I don't go to the practices on purpose because I feel like, I want to see it. And I'm always like, oh my God, they're amazing. And Lindsay's like, if you saw them yesterday.
I love that process though. Like that's part of the process that we love to see that growth. So this is a panel of our judges, I think from last year. And the rest of the middle schools is usually sitting there too. So the judges kind of listen, they take notes on the presentations, then there's a question, like after their presentation, the judges have some hard-hitting questions, which is always stressful for the kids. And then the judges discuss, and we usually announce at least one winning project, and a lot of times we're able to take pieces of other ones. We've been able to implement a lot of changes that the students can then see in their, for example, the one that won this year was developing a new course. We're teaching that course now next year. The one that won the year before was actually we do a field trip to Philly with our kids, and that was planned because a group planned it, wanted to change their field trip. So we did the flexible seating one.
Yeah.
So it's really nice for the kids to see, I worked on this, the teachers value my opinion, we're fortunate to get some funding to be able to do these things, and then they can actually see them implemented.
And it's really nice to see the investment from kids. Like when we first started doing this, it was like, how are we going to grade this? And where is the grade going to live? Is it going to live in which class? And honestly, they don't get graded on this. They get a ton of feedback, and it does factor into advisory letters or comments or feedback, but it doesn't, there's no grade attached to it, and they work really, really hard. I remember, our current seniors, I remember there was a kid who really struggled, and when she was in 7th grade, that group they were stickers and stuff. Do you remember this? And they wanted to do a subscription service, and they wanted it to be then an econ class, an elective. They had this whole plan, and they were there late at night, because they have no homework that week. They were there late, printing. They wanted to be able to give each of the judges a sample and give us a folder. And they were just really, that was before I was in this role, so I was helping them more. But they were so into it. And they still talk about it. And it's that's the stuff that I think really does stick with them, which is awesome.
And then the second project that we do in 7th grade is in the spring. It's Architecture Expo. So students are also in groups. This is also one where it's 4 days usually as well.
7th grade needs breaks.
Yeah.
So the teachers, everyone's okay with having a week.
Well, and you always think as a teacher, I'm like, oh, it's a week without classes, great, I'll get some stuff done. I never get one single thing done in these weeks at all, but it's fine. So they're combining architecture, history, math, tech, and they're examining current structures, comparing them to ancient structures they're talking about in their Latin class, and then we do a trip into Baltimore. And they have a physical building that's in Baltimore, and they're kind of then they end up building a 3D model of that in SketchUp in my class. So for Architecture Expo, this one more than Project Innovate, we do more things in class leading up to, they have to learn how to use SketchUp. They don't know how to use that. They have to learn about the buildings in Latin. So this one takes a little more intentional curriculum in your class.
Tiring too.
First out, just to go through quickly, but they're doing team building. They have a woman architect come in and speak to them. They do a workshop with Sydney, which has been so helpful to add in scaling, because scaling buildings and then putting them in SketchUp is always a little difficult. Then they're also building a physical model in addition to their digital one. They're taking toilet paper rolls and glue and paper and all kinds of things to build a physical model that's probably, I don't know, they're usually about half the size of this table, I would say, of it as well. So they're also kind of working with their hands in there.
The pyramids last year. Remember the pyramids were in the hallway?
Yes, they were those were
to scale.
To scale. They were big. On the 3rd day, we go down to Baltimore, get them to look at some of these different awesome buildings in Baltimore. And then they work on the models, and then we just do a gallery walk for that one. It's no big presentation. There's not a digital presentation other than their model. They're not standing up in front presenting, but we have them all out in the hallway for a while. We have all the kids come through and walk through and look at their models, and they're kind of standing there, and they can just be proud of their ask questions. So that's a little, that one is a little less stressful for the kids, I think. Just
One
because
thing
they
I would
don't
say
have-
about that one too is last year the timing worked out perfectly where like it happened right before student-led conferences. So when parents were in for student-led conferences, the kids were early, so I'm hoping we can do that again this year.
Yeah.
But they also, I kind of forgot about it till right now, but also like this is an example of something that we did that really wasn't going well. Like
Oh, yeah.
before we had
That's what the
signature
slides about.
projects, we had Architecture Expo when I got to Garrison and it was boring.
Yeah.
It was like the kids writing a huge paper comparing, they always went to Baltimore, but besides they were just comparing their landmark or whatever in Mount Vernon to their ancient, and they hated it. Like when I was in ARC, like I was trying to help them with their papers. They were doing all this research. Some of the ancient monuments were really hard to find information on. It was really, really boring. And like honestly, we probably would have scrapped it if we could, but our Latin teacher loved the he was very tied to it. So it was like, how can we reimagine this? And we were able to really reimagine it to be something that now I think kids really, really love. Getting more art.
And it took
getting
even more
math.
evolution than that. It was like this, and then we tried something that didn't work, and then we tried, it evolved to this, and it took a little while. These are just some pictures of them on the trips. This is an example of like one of the models that they were building and then built, just so you can kind of see what they ended up looking like. They turned out really, really cool.
And then 8th grade, we have 2 as well. So in the fall, we do a food justice project. It started off as a globalization of chocolate project. They would read the bitter side and sweet in English class. And then this one has changed a lot of times too. At this point, we are doing food justice, and we like it. We really like it, but it is still evolving. But they're still reading Bitter Side of Sweet and some other books in English class. And then now that we have the global citizenship class, they're doing a lot of work looking at like food systems and food justice in their classes. They're working on a project in groups with that. And then we do have like a day of, also in English class they're writing food memory narratives, which they already did but not at the same time. So they choose like a food that has a memory to them. A lot of times it's really cool. We can present them, do like a multicultural potluck, and we can present them there because they're pretty awesome. If they write about like making latkes with their grandma or something, you know. And so what we do on the it happens a lot in the English class and in history class, and then on the day of, we take one day for this project, and the kids spend the day doing like actual service learning projects. So they go to different sites in the community. This year we had a much bigger 8th grade class than we have had in the last couple of years, so we had to find more sites throughout the city. But you know, some are at a food pantry, some are, there's like a weekend backpack program like that's nearby. Yeah.
Are there, in the upper school, I know we're talking about, you know, your middle school, in the upper school, are there like participatory action research electives that kids can carry over what they're doing in these kinds of projects to go further?
Yeah, not really, honestly. Like, I feel like they'll take some of the skills from this and, you know, bring it to upper school, and some of the interests that they may have discovered. I know, like, some of the places that will go for the food justice project, then they go to upper school, and there's a big service league in the upper school, and so they'll continue to work with them, but not as much.
Well, what sparked my interest is that there was a high school in the Millennium Brooklyn High School, or Brooklyn, I forget which goes first, but they did, and as part of their elective participatory action research on food justice on mock beef. And you know, they surveyed people, are you vegetarian, are you not? You know, are the reasons you're vegetarian because the cruelty and injustice in the agribusiness that we have? And then what if, you know, it's just a slice out of a cow's shoulder to get the tissue, and then they can, you know, make meat out of that. Would that change your opinion? And some kids were like, yeah, maybe. So.
What's the name of the school?
Millennium Brooklyn High School or Brooklyn Millennium High School, I forget which one goes first.
I think that is.
But there's stuff like that going on that is really, really cool, and they would go out and do field research. Now they're 9th and 10th graders, so they're a little bit older, but it's worth looking at.
Yeah, no, I love that, yeah. I mean, basically that day, the kids are spending part of their day, and everyone's schedule is a little different depending on like the logistics of when the place can take us, honestly, because they're serving lunch here, but breakfast here. So half part of the day they're working on the project, part of the day they're out in Baltimore doing service, and then in the afternoon that's when we call it the food and the Food and Literature Festival, but basically the kids can bring in food that they wrote about in their food. They don't have to, probably they have to, that they wrote about in their food memory narrative, and like we get together and they taste each other's food, and then we read all the essays and just do a gallery walk and read them. So it works. I think it works really well. They really liked it this year.
That was the
yeah,
festival.
They really liked it. And then the multicultural, it's not called the multicultural potluck anymore. I don't know what it's called anymore.
Okay.
When COVID, we don't do a potluck, but it's like a multicultural celebration.
Celebration.
Yeah,
Celebration. Yeah.
Happens like 2 weeks later or a week later, it's closed. And so some of our kids, like there's a lot of performances for that in the theater, but we have our kids read some, like maybe 4 of them between acts. They kind of share their food memory narrative, which is really cry. Yeah. So really, it's also a way to kind of like a lot of the kids' food memory narratives are around like a cultural, a food that's meaningful to their family, which is really nice. And we do have students, like international students at that point, so it really does work out nice. And then second semester, we do a Shakespeare project. And this is also like, I don't know that this will always be a signature project. I think we will always do it, but it's, some of them are more interdisciplinary than others, I'll say. So this was something that they always read A Midsummer Night's Dream in English class, and we were like, how can we make this more interdisciplinary? So they do. They read it in English class, and then they act it out, basically, for the whole middle school. So you can kind of see we have like a little landing in our lobby, and all the kids kind of scrunch around to watch one year we did it outside because of COVID, so I don't know what we'll do this year. But they put on a performance. And so we have a Latin day that happens around the same time, so they're making stolas in Latin. There's a music piece to it, but it's fun. It's fun. And it's also nice that with these signature projects, I don't think we've done a great job yet of showcasing them broadly, but within the school, it's something that like the 6th graders sit and they watch and they're like, oh, that's fun. I can't wait till I'm in 8th grade. Or Project Innovate is a big one. The whole school watches a lot of it. And so, they're like, oh, I can't wait till I'm in 7th grade. And they send out lots of surveys to students so that the kids see that. They're like, this is something that I want to, that I'm looking forward to doing. So, Shakespeare, yeah. Oh, and they go to see Romeo and Juliet, Chesapeake Shakespeare Company. I forgot about that piece. And then, so they do a whole little thing. And then we also have a Latin day too. So it kind of all ties together with that. Yeah.
So those are the projects we're doing now. This is kind of how because it's like, these are great, sure, but like, how would we get started? And I know our school, being a private school, might be a little bit different than those of you in public school. So we realized that. But the first thing we did, we started back in like 2016. Was that before you came around? That was when you came. It was when you came, and then we did it. Yeah. So we started thinking about what projects we already did that we could build on. So the Shakespeare one was one we already did that we added on to. The Architecture Expo we already did but added on to. So we started first with like, what do we already do that we can add on to? We don't need to like reinvent the wheel and start with some big, huge thing that like has no roots in anything. So that felt very overwhelming. So that was the first thing we did. Then we talked about like what skills and content do we actually want to cover. And I think on the next slide, or maybe 2 slides, Shannon will talk about like kind of how we can kind of like suss that out. And then this was the big one. If schedule, logistics, and cost was not holding us back, what would we want to do? So our division head at the time was like, okay, like think really big, like really, really big. What would you do? So we did, and we had, I can't remember specifically but I remember sitting in a group like thinking like, oh my gosh, what if we could do this? What if we could do
all
this?
the teachers were like, wanted something that was tied to their, like, I want to do a puppet show. Remember the art teacher?
And we tried that
for 1 year, and it was a disaster.
We had a lot of failures. Like, we're putting the good stuff out there right now. We had a lot of like failures. Like, nope, not doing that again. Like, sure, lots of flops. But this question I thought was really interesting because it was nice to think big for a minute. And then ultimately, like we're able to pull some pieces of the big picture things we wanted to do in, which was nice. Not all, for sure. And then 4 was how can we make this feel manageable for teachers, which is where this kind of schedule came from. Because we were like, okay, well, we can't just start with like all these projects. So what we had thought was, okay, 2016-17, we'll run that first project. So for 6th grade, was it STEM?
It was probably
STEM day for 6th grade. For 7th, it was definitely Architecture Expo. So again, it was tweaking. In 8th grade was adding and tweaking for that.
But we were doing Project Innovate too, so I don't think we were counting at that point, Architecture Expo was the research paper. So I think that's what we,
you're right. Then in the next school year, we're like, okay, so we're gonna run that Project A again, but we're also gonna plan and run Project B. The following school year, we were just gonna tweak both of them. That was this school year. And then in our plan, we were gonna start planning a third interdisciplinary project. And it actually wasn't really COVID because this was the year that COVID was in the year. It actually wasn't that stopped us. It was like, okay, hold on, this is like a lot. Like it was like, we were like, we can't take, like 7th grade is gonna take 3 weeks off of school. Like it was too much. So we realized like, no, actually this feels good. There's one in the spring, there's one in the fall, like this feels good. And there's lots of other interdisciplinary things that we do that aren't big projects. Like I collaborate a lot with our music teacher. We do a garage band unit where they compose music in their music class, and then they come to my room and they make it in garage band. So like little things like that we do, but they don't have to be like a
English.
whole thing.
I forget what they're reading.
What grade?
Perry Lotus, is it? And there's like the main character like crochets or something. So the art teacher cross stitch. I don't know. So the art teacher goes in and teaches them to like, and they cross stitch a symbol from the book and write about it. So like that is, I think, a byproduct of these signature projects is people are talking and they're like, oh wow, you would be really helpful for this. And so they're starting to kind of, come together. I honestly think that 8th grade Shakespeare will probably, continue but not be a signature project because this year it just kind of organically, we decided to add all 13 into the 8th grade reading list, which is about the soccer team in Thailand that got trapped in the cave. And so it's nice to have, we wanted more nonfiction, that kind of worked. And there's so much in there about math and science, about how they got them out of the cave. And then our science teacher was like, well, could we do a trip to a cave? And so this year we're not, it's not a signature project, but we did the trip to the cave. They're reading in English, they're doing stuff in science. So I'm hoping that teachers can work on that over the summer, and then that feels like we're not forcing it to be interdisciplinary, it feels like it just is. So I feel like there is like a lot of there'll be 2 big ones that we can promote and put on our pretty graphics, but there's lots of other, I think we just have more of an interdisciplinary mindset than we did before. So. Who is this one?
Yeah, real quick. So just, so like Lindsay was saying, Sharon, she's sort of our project manager for the Project Innovate project. Our 6th grade science teacher is the project manager for STEM Day. So each of these signature projects does have a point person that really is the project manager. So they're the ones that are leading any of our planning times. They're creating a lot of fuss on the back end is like Google folders and drives and getting the teams together and who picked what project and those logistic things. But we always have a point person, that we're go-to for each project. Which helps to keep things more manageable and organized for each of us. They sort of delegate the tasks to the rest of us of what each of us are doing. And then we mentioned this in the beginning of our session, but on Friday mornings, we do a late start Friday. So we're in our division meetings 7:45 in the morning, and so a lot of that time is to get together and get these logistics out, or make sure if we're having speakers come in for a lot of these we call them, we contact them, like we use that actual time to get it done, so it's not something that we're staying after school to figure out or trying to get our schedules to match, because they never will, to get that, so we really dedicated a lot of our time. So now that Project Innovate for us on 7th grade is done, we're like gearing up for
we're getting
the architecture. We just said, we gotta pick those dates, we gotta get this the bus coming up for the field trip,
Lindsay emailed me, can we get some time?
So we're sort of on this cycle now, though, now that they're established, that we can just sort of tweak and go, but definitely having the project manager for each one is key. Like you gotta have a point person.
And that's really, honestly, I don't know how it is at every school, but like, there's not a ton of leadership opportunities for our middle school teachers. It's getting better with like department chairs being some middle school, because department chairs at our school are K-12, and traditionally they've been more upper school. We have a lot more middle school this year, working on that. But this is a nice leadership opportunity for someone to kind of take, there's a very, very small stipend, it's more just a thank you. But it's, what I can get out of the budget to give to it. So it is like a formal role, which is nice, and then that person can kind of help us also. I think a big piece of that, in the beginning we were doing it, but we weren't really, and we still sometimes struggle with carving out time to reflect after on like what went well, what could we do better, all of those pieces. So, and the Project Innovate has the most follow-up, because then you've got teams that win, and someone has to work with them to make all of this come to reality.
And then the skills, I think.
Yep. So this was, so I told you I was in the ARC role, Academic Resource Coordinator, and our head of middle school was wonderful, and we kind of were the ones who were started the signature project piece, and so we kind of mapped out, I think we took this from 21st century skills from the glossary of education reform, but kind of taking out some 21st century skills that we thought were really important and mapping out, like, we're not going to hit each one in each project, that's not the goal, but are we hitting them somewhere? So like financial literacy. So a big part of Project Innovate that we didn't mention is a budget. Like they have to come up with a budget for the project. And that's hard. That's hard.
It's
for
really
them.
hard.
Yeah. And so
because they're always like, we'll just get it donated. We'll get everything donated.
We'll do a big sale. They're always going to do a big sale.
It's not going to raise the $5,000 for the structure.
Yeah.
So it's a good like people. I mean, yes, you think people might just, but like it doesn't really work.
No.
That way. Like
and teaching them, like we've taught them a lot to do like a plan A, a plan B. Like if money were no object, because I want them to think big. Because they always are then trying to get it now. They're like really aware of like, well, maybe we'll win if we're cheap. And so I'm like, no, like do a plan A. Like if you had money, what would, and then what's the plan B if we want to, like they'll say like, we'll start slowly and kind of build up. Like flexible seating, that's what they wanted. Like let's start with 3 class, 1 for each grade level, and then let's add every year, which was I thought a great plan. So this is just something that, and we revise this each year too, because it changes as the projects evolve. We're probably due to add some new skills and take a look at the skills. Yeah, and then next steps for us. I mean, we need to, like this reflection and that planning time is ongoing. We spend, like at the end of the year faculty meeting, we have a whole day, so we'll spend more time. Honestly, we had a big turnover 2 years ago, and like at that point it was like, okay, we're not really going to change much. We're just going to get people on board with what we're currently doing. Now we've had no turnover for 2 years. So like this year we can really get into the meat of like, you've lived this, everyone here has lived it for at least 2 years, what do we want to do? And then we are lucky at Garrison, there is a, it's called a Talcott that you could apply to over the summer to get paid to like do collaborative work with. So like it's a really good, like that all 13 group, I'm going to really push them to try to do that so that they can get paid for their work. And then, yeah, like I said, some will shift out of official signature project status. And we just got to keep revisiting and keep, but this is the big one that we need help on. So if anyone has ideas, like exploring ways to showcase projects to families, like, I don't know.
We do have kids put their projects, we have a pretty extensive like e-portfolio that the kids do, not just for signature projects, but through all their classes. They put stuff in an e-portfolio throughout the year to reflect, and that's great. But to actually get the messaging out, like, I mean, the parents do see it at the end of the year, but like, we're not great with like during the project and showcasing it, like you said, to prospective families.
Or even just our broader community, from lower school and upper school as well.
We do social media posts.
That's what I was going to say. Do you have social media posts?
We do post, yeah, definitely post on social media for sure.
I mean, this year we recorded all of, like, because we had talked about, should we invite parents to the Project Innovate? But it's long. It's like hours of sitting there listening to presentations, and the kids are so nervous, but they get like crazy nervous if the parents are there. Like, so we recorded it this year and sent it to families. I think that was appreciated. We've talked about doing, I think it was right around COVID when we were talking about trying to do like a signature project night where parents could come in and like hear about the different projects. We haven't quite figured it out. Sydney just found that they had this lovely Rover magazine laying here that was like a year in review. I was like, oh, this would be good. Like something like this that we could send home to families. Because there's so many pictures and there's so much, there.
So much content.
But I don't know if the kids are, I mean, I think they're telling their parents pieces, but like it was great when the parents came for student-led conferences and they were like, oh my God, you built this? And then the kids could really walk through what they did. So,
yeah, that's what we're working with.
Yeah. And then, like, this is the smaller, lots of, like, this was an art and science thing that happened, so lots of, like, smaller projects happening, collaborations. And then I think how to get started, I mean, I think the biggest thing, and we can kind of talk about this a little bit, is, like, I think getting faculty on board, I think that is probably the biggest obstacle in our upper school right now, from going back to your question. I think people are pretty siloed and maybe are happy being siloed, or they, have AP tests to worry about. Like, we're lucky in middle school we don't have to deal with that. So that is something that I think we need to think about, like how does this continue on for students? And then I think looking at existing projects, like everything doesn't have to be brand new, and don't be afraid to try something and say, no, that didn't work. We're scrapping it, or we're gonna retry it. Like, you can tell if it's something you should try to fix or not. And then taking a look at your gaps, like we don't do a ton of, we're better now, but like a couple of years ago, we looked at, we really don't do a ton of financial literacy, and they were doing a lot in the lower school. Our lower school was doing a really good job with that in like 4th and 5th grade, and then it was like, ooh, are we dropping the ball on this when they get to middle school? So trying to incorporate those skills in there. Work in stages, with any change, that's important. And then I think really it only works if you have time that you can dedicate to planning. Otherwise it'll just feel really
It would be
boring.
really impossible if we didn't have that meeting time.
And it's a good reminder too, like, oh, like it is coming up. We're meeting about this today, and it gets
Right, and it's good because it shows the schools, if since you're giving us time, the school's giving us time to, like, the school values what we're doing, which feels good as teachers too, so that's helpful.
Any thoughts? Yeah.
What's your number of students in middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th?
Small, 120 something, like
120 total?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's small.
Okay.
It's small.
School
might give about 600.
And then as a middle school head of school, do you feel like, I know that our principals' hands are tied as far as professional development, like our days are locked. I mean, there's just so much other that he doesn't have freedom.
Yes.
You would think as a principal, he'd have a lot of say. But we're a K through 12 school also. We started at babies all the way up. And he doesn't. He has very limited time on what he can do with us. Do you have more freedom?
I think over time, yes. I think it does take time though. Like the first year I inherited the calendar and it was like, oh, here. And so I am always the person in meetings who are like, no, we need more PD days. We need more PD time. And sometimes it's hard because sometimes it's like other divisions might not want all that PD time and are just giving people free time. And I'm like, no, we need to meet. But
he's not deciding that PD.
He's not.
We have someone else deciding PD.
So I do get to like weigh in on next year's calendar. Okay. So I will fight for those PD days.
Okay.
Because if they're in the calendar, then I can fix time on them. Because there is a lot of things that they need.
But those faculty meetings, the Friday mornings are like awful.
Do you have any of that, like weekly PD, like weekly time?
It's not PD, it's like weekly faculty meetings.
Yeah, like we have late start. Well, it's not. We have late start every Friday, and so like one a month is a department meeting. Sometimes it's like DEI, but I like try to get at least two whenever I can reserved for division meetings. And we don't do a lot of like, we'll do like kudo, little wins and announcements, but most of the time is spent working because we need it.
Yeah, we don't have that.
Yeah, you need that. I feel like
that's
do most of your schools have time built in, like
an early release day or a late?
Because when I worked in a city school, a charter school though, but it was a Baltimore City school, we did add in like a Wednesday 1:10 dismissal, so we had time.
Yeah.
No? Oh, that's the worst.
Yeah, thank you.
So is it an after school?
When do you meet as a faculty meeting?
Our faculty meetings are once a month before school. But we are destroyed in meetings. I mean, there's weeks that I'll have a meeting every day of the week.
Like during the school tag?
Before school.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what about planning time?
We do have that for departments.
Yeah. Teachers in Baltimore County, and they do have.
So we do meet as.
She's an elementary teacher, and they do have fairly regular. I don't know that it's every week, but it's fairly often that they'll have an early release day.
I mean, if you're gonna do, this is like,
We get early releases at the end of each quarter.
So that is, I think
We get an early release on Thursday and then no school Friday. But that's so that teachers can get grades and that's not, they're not planning, they're not working with each other, they're grading.
We have a lot.
But I would say if you don't have time, you can't plan a big, huge thing, but you have a good relationship with the English teacher, start doing I mean, you can align. A lot of what we were doing was like, we weren't even being intentional about when we taught what. Like, I remember when Nedra started, she was like, well, I forget what it was, but she was saying when she taught, in geography they were learning about Haiti, and they were doing a lot of talk around earthquakes and like the impact. And then in science they were doing like earthquakes and tsunamis, and they weren't doing it at the same time. So they didn't have that background for when they learned about Haiti. So it was just moving things around even.
So sometimes it's also just like, do you even know what your other teachers are teaching? Like that was helpful. Like like, we did that, like, go through kind of meet and just go through, like, what are your units? Like, what do you teach as a digital thinking teacher? Like, I don't know exactly what Sydney's teaching in math. I don't know exactly what books they're reading in English. I do for my advising sometimes, but, like, not enough in advance that I could, like, plan something. So it's nice just to have teachers talk about, like, what are you teaching? Like, I don't know what.
And we're trying, and we continue, like next week, actually, this week tomorrow, is we're trying something new called Open Classroom Week.
Oh, yeah.
We've been working as a middle school on, like, what are our core beliefs, like, what's our educational philosophy really, but, like, what are our core beliefs, and, you know, about students, you know, need this to learn. They're lovely. I could share them with you. But at the end of last year, we came up with like 8 core beliefs. So every time we get into a conversation about retakes or something, we can go back to those core beliefs and be like, well, what is in line with these core beliefs? And so through that conversation, you know, one of our teachers actually was like, well, you know, now we're at the stage where how do we do this? Like, look, where is the evidence? And so we talked about wanting to know more about what each other are doing. She did a Klingenstein some kind of fellowship, and had one of her teachers worked at a school that did this Open Classroom Week, so she shared it. So we're trying it, and the upper school is actually going to try it too, which I'm excited about. So we have this big Google Doc with all the classes that are going on this week, and people sign up to see each other. Like, we're aiming to go to 5.
5, but you said like you can go to for 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah,
with us.
just
Like,
stop
I'm going
it.
to Sydney's class, I think, like, I don't know, tomorrow or Tuesday, I don't
Yeah.
remember what day. I'm just gonna like pop in for a little bit and see what she's doing.
And it's for us, like, we have our core values. I think the one that we are working on the most, or talking about what we need to work on the most with kids, is be curious. And I think trying to model that curiosity among teachers too, that we're still learning. We need to be in each other's classrooms. We need to
come here.
Yeah. So I'm hoping this week, and then we have the Friday morning late start. So this Friday, you know, we're to bagels, and we'll get together and like talk about what do we see in classrooms? Like, what are some takeaways? Another thing that we have done, that if you can't get a PD day, and I know your schools are much bigger, so it would be harder, but I think the best PD sometimes we'll do grade, like subject or grade. I did it even when I was in public school, retreat days. So like, you know, maybe like if you can coordinate it so that you can get coverage. Like we bring in subs for it if we plan it long enough in advance. And like we'll have like English teachers. We did an English teacher retreat day, and we didn't need too many subs because they each watched each other. Like we all sat in on the 6th grade English, 7th grade English, 8th grade English. We actually sat in an upper school English class to just kind of see the continuum. And then we used that whole afternoon to meet, to talk about what did we see, where are we going, what are kind of our next steps thing. We've done it before with English and history, but that's harder because you need more coverage. But I think those, like any time, you know, if you don't have time in the schedule, could your principal maybe get some substitutes for a day to give you time?
And he will do that.
Yeah. So, and it's nice, and if you have, I don't know if you have like a curriculum person, like when I was the ARC, I used to organize that. Now, Emma's our ARC person, her and I will do it together, or something, like we'll try to involve department chairs too, but kind of using that time, getting creative. Any other thoughts, questions? No, it's the last session.
I
so
know,
it's
thank you
probably
for
5
having
minutes
me
of
for
the
the
last
session. We were like, no one's gonna come to this. When are they gonna eat lunch? I don't know. Like, I'm a food person. But thank you.
Thank you guys so much.